For example, I have a dog, Nala. I have three.
Hmm.
Nala is a great dog, but I live in Florida. I've never brought her to the beach because I'm very scared. Her recall is just terrible when she's distracted. I've tried everything. I've taken her, she's gone away to different programs. When she's with other people and the trainers, she is so obedient. We trained her in Manhattan. He would walk down the street in Manhattan with no leash on her, and she would just totally be obedient, follow him, not be distracted. Well, forget about it. In my own backyard, I can't even get her to come inside because she's chasing rabbits and doing all these things. I'm dying to get her to go to the beach. And as you said, there are so many people that have pets that they would love to bring places. What would be a great tool or some, options of how to do that kind of thing?
So I think I'll hit that in a second, but you touched on something that I think is incredibly important. The in the dog training world these days, the what we call a board and train or an
Mhm.
inboard training programs are incredibly popular. So
Yeah,
somebody that is busy with their life sends a dog off to get trained by a professional. The professional may do exceptionally good work. The dog may be wonderful with the person that trained them, but that doesn't mean that the dog's going to listen to you. And the transfer of information from the person that maybe taught the professional trainer to the owner is the most critical part.
right,
And dogs are not machines. It's not like once you've finished it, the dog's going to do that for anybody. It's about you understanding the process and all the things that went into it along the way, and then participating along the way. And I think
right.
some of that is a flaw in the design of the way a lot of trainers design their board and train programs. And if you're not heavily involved in the process and practicing along the way, then the dog's not going to listen to you, right? They
Right.
don't understand that. It's completely different. So for me, the tool that is most commonly used to finish good recall work in pet dogs is an electronic collar.
Right.
And they can be controversial, right? But if they're used appropriately, the modern collars can be very subtle. And if they're used properly, over what we call a reward based foundation, meaning the dog has
Mhm.
been taught properly to recall for rewards and people have gone through all the incremental steps. They introduce that tool properly, then that can be a great tool for kind of finishing it off and making sure that the recall is reliable in
Yeah.
real world situations. And that's
Right.
what everybody wants. I'm not saying that your dog would necessarily need that. You'd have to sort of see what's happening in your relationship, but
Mhm.
that might be one of the tools that people would use to finish that work, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. I had our mutual friend Cameron Ford on, and he talked about that relationship between the canine and the handler being so important because if you don't have that relationship, the handler won't know to be listening to the dog properly, and the dog won't, be able to do their job properly. So
Right.
I do agree. And, us sort of laymen in this dog world or a dog owner, for me, the dog sleeps in my bed. I cuddle it. I saved the dog in Manhattan in a situation where she was found tied to a post with staples in her head. I don't
Oh,
like to yell at her. So,
right. Sure. Of course.
so I let her do whatever she wants to much to the dismay of my entire household. I'm a terrible trainer. Although for me, and like a lot of people, we're obsessed with watching the social media about trainers like Caesar and all these people that you walk in and they change your life in an hour and you go home. I know it's not really how that works.
No,
Um,
that's
right.
television.
But no, a lot of people have said that the electric collar is, fantastic. It's what works. I think it's hard to, again, for the average person to know which one to buy, how strong you make it. But I think it's maybe a little trial and error, or is that wrong? Is there a certain kind you should do?
I think the idea is anybody that's contemplating using the tool should get professional help, right?
Right.
Because there's a lot of nuance to how it's used, right? So how it's introduced, what the dog's previous training was, and the levels at which the collar is going to be used are wildly variable depending on the individual dog.
Right.
One dog is very sensitive and use it on a tiny, very low level. And if you've played around with any of the modern electronic collars, they can be incredibly subtle. At the lower levels, you can barely feel them. It's a little
Right.
tiny tingle, right? And so they have a lot of possible range of use. And so getting it adjusted to a given dog is something that takes a little bit of experience. And if you're not becoming a dog trainer, if you just want your dog to be trained properly, then I always encourage people that are going to use that tool to get professional help. That way, somebody can walk them through the step by step parts and they can help you figure out what levels the dog's going to work on and maybe what foundation pieces you missed, because that's the biggest part of it. When we talk about using something like an electronic collar, I'm one of those people that does not advocate for using that tool right off the bat. There's an entire foundation of teaching that goes ahead of that so that the dog has a good relationship with you, understands what the the behavior you want them to use to do, like what the recall command is. They've been rewarded with something they like repeatedly for that. So there's a whole process of generalizing and teaching that goes ahead of the use of that. And that's sort of like the final piece that comes in and helps
Oh,
you
got it.
finish the thing off.
Okay, well, can you talk a little bit about that for someone who's trying to teach their dog basic recall or not to jump? What are some beginning steps that are really important that we might be missing that seems maybe obvious but really isn't?
Sure. So without getting too technical, like there are a whole series of steps, but you start out with, if I were going to take a brand new dog that doesn't know what come when called means, and I
Mhm.
was going to teach that, right? I'd start out doing something that we call restrained recalls, which means somebody holds your dog
Mhm.
and you have a reward for the dog, whether it's a food or a toy. You get the dog excited and you move away from the dog. And when the dog acts like it wants to come to you, you call the dog and they let the dog go and the dog runs over to you and you give it a reward, right? So now the dog's learning what that word means. And then there are a series of steps in which we teach the dog to come when they're focused on something they want. So I
Mhm.
take an assistant and the assistant takes food and kind of gets the dog to follow them away from me.
Mhm.
And then when I call them, they take the food away and I make an attraction and the dog runs back to me and I reward the dog for coming to me. So now that dog's learning, even when you're focused on something you want, if you hear come or here, you turn and you leave that and you come back to me. And there's a whole series of those steps. And then
Right.
there's a step where I introduce a leash to them and I help tap them towards me with the leash. And then the final stages of that would be potentially to bring in an electronic collar and on low level use that to remind the dog, hey, this way, right? When the leashes and stuff come off the dog. And so if that's done properly, then the dog knows exactly what come or here means.
Mhm.
They've had lots of rewards for doing it. And now they're excited to do it. And if they get a little distracted by something or there's something out there that they want more than they want the reward.
Mhm.
So you're going to hear this a lot of discussions in the dog training world now about what we call purely positive or force-free methods versus more traditional methods where people
Mhm.
would use aversives or pressure to make a dog do something they didn't want to do, right? And those two worlds shouldn't be separate worlds. We all teach our dogs with rewards. We all want the dogs. We use positive reinforcement throughout the teaching phase. The issue comes for most average dogs is when they want something else in the world more than they want the reward, right? So reward based or force free training breaks down. If my dog likes chasing squirrels better than it likes food, the dog may know I have food. It may know come means to come, but it's like, thanks, but the squirrel's more interesting to me. I'm taking that, right? And that's the place that something like the electronic collar might come in and bridge that gap for us.